Alison Sargent joins me on this today. Hi, Alison. Hi, lots of focus, of course, on this 10th anniversary of the start of the civil war in Syria.
That's right, Jeannie. The strongest front page, I think, is from Al-Araby Al-Jadeed. This is a pan-Arab paper based in London. Their front page shows a little boy sitting on a pile of shells in Idlib. This main headline essentially reads, "This is how you destroy a people." The paper accuses the regime of Bashar al-Assad of, quote, transforming a revolution into a civil war. In the words of another pan-Arab paper, Al-Quds Al-Arabi, 10 years after the revolution, half of the Syrian people have been displaced. The other half are struggling to survive. The paper writes that the Syrian president, quote, far from succeeding in reestablishing his power, has put it in the hands of Iran and Russia. Lebanese paper L'Orient Le Jour also credits Iran and Russia with the fact that the Syrian government now controls over 60% of the country's territory. The paper writes, Bashar al-Assad, in power for 21 years, is still there, governing a country that is in ruin.
We're going to move over now to the UK, where the press is focused on the crackdown that took place over the weekend with police who broke up a vigil for Sarah Everard. Now, she was murdered while walking home in London earlier this month.
That's right, Jeannie. Police really aggressively broke up this vigil. The most iconic image from this crackdown we can see on the front page of the Daily Mail. This woman, Patsy Stevenson, being pinned to the ground by two male officers. The paper's talking about the shaming of the Metropolitan Police. Now, despite public outcry, the chief of the police, Cressida Dick, has refused to resign. The Independent notes that this all comes as the government is examining legislation that would actually give police more power to rein in protests. Several papers today are writing that their actions over the weekend show that the last thing police need is more power.
This very aggressive treatment of women at this vigil is compounding a growing sense of inequality for women in the UK.
Yeah, there's sort of a horrible irony in the fact that these women who were gathering to protest violence against women were then met with more violence. There's also the fact that the man who's charged with killing Sarah Everard is actually a London police officer himself. Basically, the aggressors are the same people that are supposed to be protecting you. The Times cartoonist Peter Schrank kind of gets at some of this irony in this cartoon. We see the sign, "Stop Violence Against Women," lying broken on the ground as women are handcuffed and taken away. Now, another cartoonist, Brian Adcock, evokes the photo that we saw earlier, depicting the officers with literally heavy hands for their disproportionate response. This cartoon illustrates the Independent's editorial today, in which they write that at the heart of all of this is a, quote, colossal sense of unfairness. The paper asks, why should women be frightened to walk home when men are not? And why was this public gathering of women, which was not even a protest, met with such a heavy-handed police response?
Alison, let's come back to France now, where this week marks 1 year since the first coronavirus lockdown took place here. The newspaper Libération is paying tribute to all of those in France who've died from the virus over the past year.
Yeah, Jeannie, we read on the front page of the paper that over 90,000 people have died of coronavirus here in France in the past year. The paper lists some of their names and ages on their front page today. Libération calls it the Great Disappearance, and the paper chose that word, disappearance, because they write that these deaths have really been invisible, obscured by numbers and press conferences, and with an absence of any kind of national ceremony for them. According to Libération, this silence has really led to a feeling of shame for the loved ones of the people who have died from coronavirus. But of course, Libération writes, there's nothing to be ashamed of. All of France has really been equally powerless in the face of this virus.
Alison, we're going to move on now to some lighter news. That's reaction to this year's Grammy Awards, which saw Beyoncé set a record for the most awarded female artist of all time.
That's right, most awarded female artist of all time, and then most awarded singer of both genders of all time. There's a lot of celebration in the press that Queen Bee has finally taken her rightful throne. I don't want to totally put a damper on it, but the LA Times reminds us of Beyoncé's complicated history with the Grammys. They say that the Recording Academy has showered her with nominations, but rarely given her any of the major awards, like Best Record. She won Best Single one time for Single Ladies. Meanwhile, Taylor Swift has taken Best Album a record 3 times now with the latest award ceremony. The LA Times writes that the Grammys need to align the history books with the dimensions of Beyoncé's honor.
And staying with the record-breaking theme, you've got one last story for us.
That's right, Jeannie. This is a record-breaking story from the football world this time. This is a Portuguese star, Cristiano Ronaldo, who set a new record for most goals ever to be scored in official matches. He now has scored a total of 770 goals in his professional career. The previous record was set by Brazilian football legend Pelé, and as we read in the Portuguese sports paper O Bola, Pelé congratulated Ronaldo for beating his record in a post on social media. He posted a picture of the two of them and wrote, "Life is a solo flight. Each makes his own journey, and what a beautiful journey you are having," which I think is a nice sentiment. It's a solo flight, not a race.
Allison, thanks so much for that. Allison Sargent there with today's Press Review.